One of the main things I talk about in the book is that restored people restore people.
That's good.
And so often we think of getting our breakthrough and getting our restoration in this and what it's going to look like. But I found so much of my restoration in service to others. I found so much of my restoration in worship, or on the mission field, or just doing what God created me to be and communing with him daily is where my restoration came. And because of that, for this podcast is an overflow of that, or
Right.
our music is an overflow of that. And that's just my thing. I encourage our listeners to, in the book, to find what's in them, what God has put in them, and their giftings, and just to kind of encourage them in the seasons of the in-betweens where it doesn't seem like a lot is happening, or where you're still growing, or you're still forgiving, or you're still grieving, or whatever it is, to have that encouragement that the ultimate restoration is in Jesus Christ. And life's not going to be perfect on this side of heaven, but you can really walk in that abundant life that Christ says he came to give us life and life abundantly, that he talks about in Scripture. And so that's one thing that restored is walking in your rightful identity in him. But it's also going back into some of those dark places where you were wounded and pulling people out. And we've shared this story on the podcast before, when Debbie was on, but I share it in the book where I'm walking into the hospital where our dad had passed away 5 years earlier, and I'm getting ready to go up and visit Chuck Short, who was like a spiritual father to me, and watching him be intubated and just struggling with cancer and just being frail and thin, just like my dad had been 5 years earlier in the same hospital. And I started to get emotional and started to think, like, why me? Why do I have to go through this? Or why, like, Lord, like, and kind of get into that pity party. But when I saw Chuck in there, I even got teary, because going into that familiar place and the familiar smells and just the environment, I was almost getting sucked back into that kind of, that person I was 5 years prior when our dad had passed. And Chuck looked, and I had mentioned it to Debbie when I was in the room, and Chuck was like, "I'm sorry, this reminds you of your dad." But it was like in that, and he got teary-eyed, and it was like in that moment, I was like, you know what, this isn't about me. This is about who I can be for them. And so that day in the hospital room, I just started worshiping, and I started using my gifting to just bring peace to the situation. And Chuck loved to worship, even when he couldn't talk, and he just raised his hand and we cried together. And that was just such a beautiful picture to me of, like, restored people restore people, is that we don't get stuck in our seasons of woundedness. And even though God will take you back to the same old places with the same old, people and the same old woundedness, and everything reminds you of your greatest moment of hurt and grief, that he's going to call you to be more. And just like Whitney's book, your book says, based off the verse of beauty for my ashes, he gives us beauty for our ashes and joy for our mourning. We're living testimonies that he does do that. And so restoration is that to me. It's not perfect. We won't be perfect this side of heaven, but we have an opportunity to partner with God and help bring others out of the pit in the process.
That's so beautifully said. And